Rachel's counselor Danny asks what Rachel saw. The girl shuts down and gets emotionless. After witnessing a murder, 13-year-old Rachel Ray Gardner is sent to a hospital for counseling only to wake up in an unfamiliar building with no memory of how she got there. Rachel is in a different moonlit room and now wants to see her mother and father. She exits the room. Cameras loom above as Rachel walks around, leading her to a wall and reading the written text. Who really are you? You should ask yourself. Who am I? The real myself or the one I believe to be? An angel? Or a sacrifice? Know yourself and new doors will open. The girl is confused and starts to walk towards the typewritten. She begins to get worried when the typewriter begins to have a conversation with her, asking about the death she witnessed. The door opens as the only way out is through an elevator, where a machine-generated voice over an intercom decrees her as a sacrifice for the inhabitants of the upper floors. This puzzles Rachel as she travels to the area where beyond it is the play area. Rachel grows anxious as the atmosphere and sounds surround her as she finds an exit. Rachel encounters an injured bird in a position an unknown terror is roaming toward. Zach debuts with a bang through a wall. Zach begins a countdown from 3 to give a horrified Rachel a chance to run away. Zach gives chase to Rachel, who enters a room of potential hiding spots. Rachel hides in a box Zach suspects she is in. Zach swings his axe at the box but could not hit the frozen Rachel. Zach walks away assuming Rachel is somewhere else. Rachel exits the box and attempts to escape. She encounters the bird that was killed, or so it appeared until Rachel saw it was not the same bird. She stitched the bird together to not look pitiful. During this time, Zach saw Rachel's hair cut off by one of his swings and realizes he missed his chance. Zach finds Rachel approaching an elevator passage and attempts to kill her. Rachel makes it to the elevator in time and travels to the hospital floor where she encounters Danny. Danny reassures Rachel he is real and that Zach will not come to the current floor. Rachel and Danny set out to find an exit. Rachel asks why Danny did not run away, and Danny answers he knew Rachel would make it to this floor, which Rachel finds strange. The two encounter a glass wall that is too thick to break. Danny concludes they are trapped and will have to stay together forever, which distresses Rachel further. The two enter a room where Rachel reads the written text. Rachel asks what these rules are and what desire is. Danny answers the latter with his desire to have perfect eyes like Rachel's, as one of his does not work well. When Rachel goes to wipe the dust off some illegible text, Danny grabs her arm to prevent dust from entering her eyes. Danny takes an anxious Rachel to the operating room and asks her to let him have a good look at her eyes. Danny praises and obsesses over Rachel's eyes, commenting on how they are like his mother's when Rachel is not terrified and how he wants to live his life next to Rachel's eyes. Danny asks Rachel to check the back room for something important, which intends to help Rachel remember something. Rachel enters the room to find false eyes, which Danny takes one of to replace his dysfunctional eye. Danny instructs Rachel not to run away. Rachel is convinced that is not the Danny she knows and attempts to escape, using a crowbar to open the locked door. Danny catches Rachel, looks monstrous, and attempts to take her now non-ideal eyes. Danny pins a pleading Rachel to the operating table. Danny's attempts do not work, however, and Rachel asks to go home to her parents, who are in hell, to Danny. His comment triggers a flashback for Rachel, resulting in her paralysis. Danny marvels at Rachel's eyes becoming beautiful again until Zach appears and slashes him down. Zach goes to kill Rachel, but her paralyzed state forces Zach to think about how boring her death would be. An announcement says Zach has now become a sacrifice, prompting him to run away. Rachel comments on the flashback, convinced she should be dead. Rachel reacts to the banging noises by Zach, who is attempting to escape. Rachel walks up to him and asks him a favor, "Kill me, please." Realizing that he will need Ray's intelligence to escape the building, the man introduces himself as Zach, claiming that he is an idiot and that if Ray helped him out of the building, he would kill her. The two travel up to B4, a place entirely made out of stone and modeled after a graveyard, with graves for them as well. The two split up to investigate the area. Ray explores and finds a library containing records of every sacrifice in the building, as well as a mysterious letter promising her that the writer knows her true wish. Flipping through the records, she finds Zach's real name to be Isaac Foster, an infamous serial killer that used to roam the deserted alleyways in search of victims. Meanwhile, as Zack destroys gravestones out of boredom, he accidentally activates a switch allowing Ray to proceed further into the building. Ray soon returns and reveals that she has learned about his past. However, instead of being afraid like Zack has expected, Ray simply reminds Zack her wish to be killed. Proceeding their way, they are confronted by a boy wearing a pumpkin mask. The boy, Edward Eddie Mason, reveals himself to be the inhabitant of B4 and wants to kill and bury Ray after having fallen in love with her at first sight. After a brief skirmish, Eddie flees and finds Ray, offering to grant her wish for death. However, Ray hesitates when she realizes that Zack won't be able to escape if she dies. Following her through the opening, Zack manages to track down the two and swears to God on their promise, immediately convincing Ray to side with him. Furious at her rejection, Eddie switches off the lights and attempts to use the darkness of his floor to his advantage to kill, but Ray thwarts his plans and steals his remote control. With the lights back on, Zack easily kills Eddie and buries him in the grave originally meant for Ray. The two proceed on the elevator up to floor B3, where they enter a prison-like environment. Ray and Zack discover that B3 is controlled by Kathy Ward, a sadistic prison warden who forces the pair through various obstacles and booby traps as punishment for their crimes. In the first room they enter, Zack accidentally traps himself in an electric chair and is repeatedly shocked, with Kathy giving Ray a hint on how to rescue him. Ray figures out that the dummies in the room are controlling the chair. Upon destroying the dummies, Zack is freed and the door to the next room is unlocked. They enter and are trapped in a gas chamber slowly filling with poison gas. Kathy explains they must solve a puzzle to escape and they have one gas mask to share, but they have a limited time before she releases an even deadlier poison gas that renders the mask useless. Ray seemingly solves the first stage of the puzzle by balancing a scale, but she begins to succumb to the gas as the time limit runs out. Ray notices that an air vent has opened and Zack boosts her up to reach it, allowing her to recover a keycard. However, in his haste to open the door, Zack breaks the card just as time runs out and the second gas begins to be pumped into the room. Ray deduces the flammable properties of the gas, creating a spark that triggers an explosion to destroy the door. Despite their escape, the two are weakened by the gas and decide to rest, where Zack recalls a dream from his childhood when he lived under abusive caretakers. When they proceed to the next room, he is forced to relive his childhood through a dollhouse puzzle mimicking his past, further agitating him. The obstacle the next room holds finally cracks Zack, involving two syringes, one being harmless and the other containing a dangerous hallucinatory drug. As he injects both into himself to spare Ray, Zack's past returns to haunt him, causing him to become more aggressive and threatening to kill Ray. Her reminder of the oath finally forces Zack to calm himself down and reaffirms it. In a flashback, it is revealed that Zack murdered his abusive caretakers after being inspired by a horror slasher movie. In the present, Zack begins succumbing to the drug again and Ray is chased into the final room of the floor where Kathy herself is. In exhilaration, Kathy gives Ray a gun and suggests she kill Zack with it. Barely managing to get a hold of himself, Zack encourages Ray but she refuses, telling him that it's their choice to kill or be killed. Impressed by her words, Zack stabs himself to uphold their oath, angering Kathy, who exits her safe room to inspect his body. Upon finding that he is still alive, she gleefully promises to torture him to death and threatens Ray with a machine-controlled gun installed on the ceiling, revealing that the gun she had given her was unloaded the whole time. Instead, Ray calmly takes out another fully loaded gun hidden in her bag and shoots Kathy in the stomach. This momentary distraction weakens her and lets Zack regain sufficient consciousness to deal the finishing blow. Ray and Zack proceed to the elevator, where Ray reveals she was in counseling after witnessing a murder when Zack collapses from his wounds. This forces Ray to keep moving ahead alone in hopes of finding anything that can heal him, meeting a priest named Abraham Gray on his floor modeled after a church complex. Gray and Ray make a deal whereby he will lead her back down to B5, Danny's floor, which stores the necessary medical gear, and in the process be allowed to let her go through a test to judge her character. Just before doing so, she promises Zach to retrieve a knife from his floor as well. Following Gray down to Kathy's floor again, Ray is instructed to restore power to the elevator in order to proceed further, and while beside him smells a strange bewitchingly sweet gas emanating from him. Journeying through the jail cells again, she is attacked by Kathy's zombie-like prisoners, now set free in her absence. Ray flees to the control room, activating Kathy's fire armament and booby traps to eliminate them. Ray is shocked to find Kathy's body missing, and is taunted by a hallucination of Kathy praising her as an exemplary sinner for her cold-heartedness. They continue down to Eddie's floor, where Ray ruthlessly crushes screaming stuffed hands emerging from the upturned graves to activate the elevator, referring them as simply doll hands. Like Kathy, Eddie's grave is upturned and his body is missing, and Ray is once again taunted by a hallucination of Eddie who questions her lack of compassion. Gray expresses discomfort at Ray's actions all the while observing her in each floor. Finally, they reach Danny's floor, only for Ray to discover in a panic that all the medicine in Danny's body are missing. With no other choice, she follows Gray back to Zach's floor. Meanwhile, back on B2, Zach has a continued dream of his childhood where he murdered another passing woman after his caretakers. Taken in by a kind old blind man, Zach tries to sat his urge to kill by murdering a random man in hopes that the blind man would fear him. However, the man merely leaves to buy more food, and Zach soon discovers that the blind man was murdered by a pair of gleeful muggers. Realizing that destroying people's happiness was satisfying for him, Zach kills the pair and declares that he is a monster. Danny then approaches the unconscious Zach and wonders if he should kill him. Danny tells the now awake Zach how he survived using body armor and fake blood, offering medicine to Zach in return for him gouging out Ray's eyes. Zach refuses, and Danny takes his leave. Meanwhile, Ray finds Zach's knife in a makeshift bedroom, and upon observing the room realizes that she still knows nothing about him. Journeying back up to Gray's floor, the priest questions Ray's motives and concludes that she is a selfish witch who causes misfortune to those around her, additionally demeaning Ray's firm belief in her god. Distressed, she flees and reunites with Zach, deciding to follow Danny's trail of blood to get medicine. On the way, Zach is forced to fight off a giant snake, sapping his strength even further. Gathering her courage, Ray decides to chase after Danny alone, and Zach gives her his knife for protection. Then Ray runs into Gray, who reveals that he has confiscated the medicine Danny was carrying. The scene shifts to a courtroom with Gray presiding as the judge over a witch trial to determine her identity, with the hallucinations of Danny, Eddie and Kathy to testify against her. Kathy points out that Ray is hiding a lying heart under her calm facade. Eddie laments that Ray is selfish, and Danny boasts of her corrupted soul that is beyond saving. With all the testimonies against her, Gray declares Ray a witch and sentences her to be burned at the stake. As Ray is about to burn in the fire, she reflects on her relationship with Zach, and finally comes to conclusion that he is her god, the one who had always helped and saved her when she needed it most. Cutting herself with his knife, Ray successfully returns to the present. With death threats, Gray surrenders and gifts her the medicine, which Ray uses to stop the bleeding, disinfect the wound, and stitch it up, declaring her realization to him. As they proceed to the final floor B1, Zach reveals that his mother's lover set him on fire, resulting in him sustaining burns all over his body that had to be covered up with bandages, and his mother selling him off to an illegal orphanage that trafficked children. Ray attempts to tell him a secret of hers as well, but cannot bring herself to in fear that he will hate her for lying to him all this time. Opening a room at the end of the corridor filled with fake flowers and the corpses of a couple unnaturally stitched together with thread, Ray begins to go hysterical, begging him to kill her before fainting. Danny then arrives suddenly and locks Zach out of the room, offering to unlock it only if he can fully explore the floor and find out Ray's past. Zach reluctantly begins exploring the floor, managing to fight his way through various death traps only to fall into a hole filled with sharp spikes. Saved by Gray, the priest explains that he controls the entire building as an experimental facility to study and observe those who claim to believe in God, with those placed in B7 as sacrifices that are to be judged by the angels on each floor. Deciding to place some interest in their relationship, he provides Zach with a clue on how to proceed, allowing him to enter Ray's room. A recorded news report details the murders of Mr. and Mrs. Gardner, a couple in wedlock whose bodies had been mutilated badly with bullet and knife wounds and were stitched together. Meanwhile, their daughter Ray was found completely unharmed even though a week had passed after their deaths, implying that she murdered her parents. Zach continues watching a recording of an interview between Danny and Ray, where Ray reveals that her parents were abusive and hated her and each other. One night, her father finally snapped and stabbed her mother to death, prompting her to take her mother's gun and shoot her father to death. Afterwards, she stitched their bodies together in order to create the perfect family and lived happily with them until the police arrived. Noticing her blank, blue eyes, Danny reveals to Ray that his mother committed suicide due to him having been born missing an eye, and he becomes obsessed with Ray since her eyes resemble his mother's. Angry and disgusted, Zach storms back to where Ray and Danny are and proclaims his suspicions that Ray is in fact the angel of B1, which Danny confirms, and reveals that Ray was sent to B7 after finding newfound faith in God by reading a Bible. Knowing that she lied to him, Zach angrily declares that he is not Ray's God. Disillusioned, Ray brought out her reloaded gun and shot Zach, but missed. Ray flees, luring Zach through more traps until he manages to corner her in the last room. He once again asks her if she intends to kill him when Danny arrives and holds him at gunpoint. Cornered by the two of them, Ray then calmly draws her gun and fires. Ray shoots Danny much to his surprise, claiming that Zach is hers to kill and sew up. However, she remains conflicted since she has lost her faith in her God, meaning there is nobody left to forgive her for her crimes, and hesitates in shooting Zach. Pushing her down, Zach reminds Ray that he is the one who made the promise to kill her, not her God, shaking Ray back to her senses. The two swear to each other again on their vow and attempt to continue their way out. Although B1 is Ray's floor, she is unaware of its location even after knowing every nook and cranny of the place, deducing that the exit must be on B2 due to her floor being the last to be built and the strange observation that no one ever came down from above. While on the way to reactivate the elevator, she encounters Gray, which questions her intentions and her identity, telling him that she has accepted herself and will hence take responsibility for her own actions and choices from now on. Satisfied with her answer, Gray gives her a hint that the exit is behind the huge stained glass window of his floor. When Zach and Ray reunite, they try to find her gun as well but realize Danny's body is missing once again and that Ray's gun has been destroyed. Together they warily return to B2, where Zach smashes through the stained glass window to reveal a long flight of stairs leading to the surface. Just then, the building's self-destruct sequence is initiated. Teen Ray and Zach flee up the stairs as the facility begins to burn and collapse, but their way is blocked by steel bars. Zach briefly has a panic attack due to his fear of fire, but he manages to regain his senses upon seeing Ray struggling to break the bars. Overcoming his fear, Zach manages to break through the bars and all other obstacles, though he breaks his scythe in the process. They finally reach the top floor, where Ray asks Zach if he truly wants to kill her, and she wouldn't fault him if he changed his mind. Zach reaffirms the promise he made when Danny arrives and shoots Ray in the back. He reveals he was the one who activated the self-destruct sequence and holds Zach at gunpoint to watch Ray die, so he will have to live with the knowledge he couldn't fulfill his promise. Ray assures Zach that she doesn't care if their vow is fulfilled or not, only that the vow was made in the first place, and she will carry the burden of their vow so Zach doesn't need to think of himself as a liar. Jealous of Ray's affection for Zach, Danny shoots Ray again and prepares to kill Zach when Gray disables him with a crossbow. Gray orders Zach to leave through the exit, assuring him there is still a chance to save Ray. Zach picks up Ray's body and heads for the door with Danny still pointing his gun at his back. Gray shoots Danny again to prevent him from shooting Zach. As Zach carries Ray through the exit, Gray has a final conversation with Danny, revealing that he became fascinated with how Ray and Zach managed to change each other, and how he's come to realize that everybody is a human, both flawed and beautiful. The building then collapses, presumably killing both Danny and Gray. Zach is able to reach the surface just as the police arrive to investigate the building collapse, surrendering to the police so Ray can be taken to a hospital. After recovering from her wounds, Ray is taken to a mental care facility where the staff attempt to rehabilitate her with limited success. Deemed guilty for his murder spree as well as killing Ray's parents and kidnapping her, Ray is informed that Zach is sentenced to death. However, shortly after hearing the news, Zach breaks into Ray's room to fulfill their oath, having escaped prison. As they both leap out of the window to escape, Ray once again pleads for Zach to kill her, which Zach reaffirms by telling her to stop crying and smile. By the time the police arrive, the room is already empty with a splatter of blood on the windowsill and Zach's knife on the floor.